Hello, welcome to Data Gym once again. Today I'm going to take you through a few steps, what to know as you enter your dataset into Excel, or you process your dataset in Excel. Excel is one of the most common ways we store our dataset, and how we store our dataset can influence how SAS processes or import the dataset. So today I will briefly talk to you about how the best practice in storing your data in Excel, as well as using proc import to import multiple sheets into SAS. As proc import in SAS, we'll wrapping it around a macro to import multiple sheets into SAS. Just to start with, this is the dataset we've used in the last tutorial. This is the iris dataset. We have the species, we have the length of the sepal, the width, the length of the petal, and the width as well. If you notice one thing here, we have sepal, a full stop before length. Normally SAS would ignore this full stop and rename it as an underscore. So I will just leave this the dataset like this. I won't touch it. I'm not going to do anything to it. But the best thing would be for you to just for you to see what SAS will do. So I won't touch it. So, but the best thing is for you to change it into underscore. Underscore would have been the best thing to do here. Okay, and it is not it will not be right for you to leave a space between, because SAS will find it difficult processing this. Okay, so no space between the name, your variable names. If it is a long name, I would advise you to put it to put an underscore between the words, or between whatever forms the name of your column. So for instance, if this is long and this, if this is sepal length for iris, so I'll just say underscore for iris. Okay, so that's easier to deal with than just leave a space between. So let me just go back. Yes, in this case we still have our full stop, so I'm not going to touch it, as I told you. Another thing there is be consistent with your naming. If you start here, you start this with a capital letter, make sure, and you start this with a capital letter, make sure every other thing follows that naming convention. So you don't just mix the naming, the letters or the cases the way you want them. Just be careful and be consistent in your naming. Okay, sepal with a capital letter, an uppercase, and then an uppercase separated by a full stop that I wouldn't advise you to use. Rather use an underscore. But for you to see how SAS processes this, I'm just going to leave it that way. Another thing there is if you are taking your data set regularly excuse me, if you take your data set regularly, you would want to establish a routine of having a consistent heading, probably with the same width for all the weeks that you've been taking you will be taking your data set. Okay, so if for instance we don't have any data set here, but we have only this header, so how you would do it is to duplicate it on each of the new sheets you're going to create. So if you create this, you have new sheets, you have a lot of sheets created. So if for instance I want to duplicate this data set, just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to duplicate this data set such that this iris 1, iris 2 in that order. I'm just going to come here, right click, okay, just right click on this name, on the sheet name, and then come to copy. Okay, you say copy. I want you to copy it here, okay, and I check this box, create a copy. Okay, so when I check the box, you see what happens. Let me put it here and let me see. Okay, so I check this and I say okay, so automatically this one creates a copy of this as iris 2. So I can just rename this as instead of iris 2, rename it as iris 1. And here the naming doesn't only affect this, it also affects the sheet. Okay, the name you give the sheet, so there shouldn't be spaces between the sheet names. You can use an underscore or just use the name this way, the way I used it, iris and the number, or just use an underscore. Okay, and here too you can just use it, you can just delete the full stop and just use the full name. Okay, so that is also acceptable. Let's duplicate this data set again here such that we have like, okay, I want to have this sheet 1 2 3 4. Okay, that's fine. Yes, so now we have this. Okay, so let's duplicate this again. This, remember, we still have the sheet 6, so we have to come here, copy, and then we have it as 2. Okay, same thing here, just copy, and then the same, create a copy, and then you have sheet 2, you have sheet 3, and here, okay, here we create a copy, and then into the same sheet 6, we call it sheet 4. Okay, so we can just delete this. That's enough for this this practice or this tutorial. So now we have how many sheets? 1 2 3 4 5. For instance, if you have a sheet like this, if you have your data set in sheets and you want to import all the data set into SAS, it is possible. So we are going to do that in a minute. So what you can see here is that I'm consistent in naming. Okay, I have data, I have iris 1, iris 2, iris 3, iris 4. Another thing I can do is just to put an underscore between. So you have an iris, put an underscore between these. You have an underscore, so this is also acceptable. Okay, this one is just iris, and then these are iris underscore. So the reason I'm adding this is that I'm just going to add, it's the same data set. I'm just assuming you have different data sets for each of the weeks. You are taking your data. So for this, I'm just going to, for us to identify which week this is, I'm just going to add 1,000 here. So don't try this on your data set. Don't delete your data and add 1,000. Just for me to identify which that this is the second sheet, I'll put 1,000 corresponding to this one here. So I just multiply this by 1,000. So here the same thing, I put 2,000. So that number I just multiply it by 1,000, and the same way here, and here we have 4,000. So that kind of gives us here is just a number, which is the normal data set, the original data set. Here we have 1,000 added here instead of 5.1. And here we have 3000 that corresponds to the number here multiplied by 1000. So here we have 4000. So we have 4 sheets, 5 sheets in all. So here it will be easier to just call a macro and say, you know what, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this imported. Okay, so it is also important that if you take your data, for instance, at the end of your data taking of your experiment, you have about 100 sheets of Excel, and you want everything to be sent to SAS. It is possible. So I'm going to go through some of the steps you can use, some of the ways you can import multiple sheets into SAS, and finally I will go through one that is a little much shorter, and I believe folks who have access to the SAS to SAS can use it. Not the University Edition version, not the University Edition. So if you have a license for that, you can use it to import your data without any problem. So for these, going back here, we have these. We have 1, 2, and 3, 4 corresponding to our different sheets containing different set of data with the same heading. You see, with the same heading. So assuming you take a data set on the same experiment for a couple of weeks, this is pretty much what you will see. So going back to just a recap of what I mentioned, of what I told you about how to enter your data set into Excel. Excel is friendly, so I wouldn't want you to do any data manipulation here, like doing formulas or calculating proportions and any other thing. You can do all that in SAS, no problem, no doubt about that. So don't do any data manipulation. You add formulas and everything just to mess up your data set. So first, if you want to proceed, so I just would want us to proceed, but before then I want to state very clearly again that be consistent in the naming of your columns or your variable names, variables, also as well as your sheet names. Be consistent. They should be consistent. If this one is week 1, this one should be week 2, this one should be week 3, this one should be week 4. If you want to name them as data, then this should be data 1, or data underscore week underscore 1, or data underscore week 1, anyhow you name it, and this should be data underscore. Okay, that is how to name your sheets as well as your variables in Excel, to make it easier for SAS to process your data without any problems. Ensure also that there are no spaces, okay? Because if I leave a space here between these, your eyes may not be able to detect that very quickly. If I leave a space, SAS will detect it and add an underscore right before that variable name. So we want to be careful. That is why I ask you to copy everything over to the next page, so that everything will be consistent across. So, and if for instance you are not around and you are someone who have access to your data log to take your data set for you, you can print this out, so the person will be able to fill in these details without any issues. So see you in the next tutorial, as we'll be importing this same data set into SAS, the same data set with multiple sheets into SAS. See you in the next tutorial. Thank you.